I'm sitting here in a 1988 Mercury Cougar XR7. This car's been sitting for an indeterminate amount of time. It's a bit rusty, it leaks coolant, it leaks oil, and I now have to drive it about 5.5 hours home from Illinois to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. Back in May, I was on a road trip with a friend of mine, and on the way back we happened to pull into a mobile station for fuel. And at the back of the parking lot was this car, and it had a for sale sign in the window. I really like 80s and 90s Fords because I was always riding in one growing up. I've always wanted something with a Ford V8. I also have an affinity for Mercury. Having that middle ground between the baseline of Ford and the luxury of Lincoln was something special, and I think it's a shame they're not in business anymore. It just resulted in some interesting styling and maybe a willingness to do some things that were a little bit unconventional. A good example of that is the rear quarter window on the Cougar that goes up. It's a very polarizing part of the car. I used to not be crazy about it, but I've grown to like it over the years. And so when I saw the car with that crazy window and the turbine wheels, my curiosity got the better of me. So I went inside, asked the guy behind the counter about the car. Turned out it was his friend's car. The price wasn't too bad, and supposedly it ran and drove pretty well aside from a couple of fluid leaks. A couple days after I got home from the trip, I wound up calling the number on the for sale sign and agreed to come out and look at the car. So my mom and I made a road trip back out, and I wound up buying it. By the time we finished all the paperwork, it was 9 p.m., but we decided we'd at least try to make a little bit of progress that night. So I gassed up the car at the mobile station, drove down the street to an AutoZone, picked up wiper blades and some fluids to top off all the fluids that were leaking out of the car, and we eventually started off on the trip back towards home. By the time we were driving, it was late at night, very dark, and I didn't really have a good feel for the controls in the car yet, so I used the first part of the drive to try to get used to the car, and in the process found a few flaws and also found a few things that worked that I wasn't expecting to work. As of a few seconds ago, I have dashboard lights, which is fantastic. I also have a fully lit center stack, which you can't see because it's still pretty dim. This is my right turn signal. So if I want to actually have a turn signal, what I gotta do, sit here with my left hand and just manually modulate it. I found my high beams. I also found the wipers, which, there we go. I think I've got the wipers turned off now. I've just now noticed that there is no center rearview mirror. It should be right about here. It is not. Oh, the car shakes. I didn't realize this because being an absolute genius, when I test drove it, I didn't really get it above 20 miles an hour. But now that we're out on the road, doing 45, it's got some kind of shake. I feel like it's in the front end because the steering wheel's really feeling it, but you know, it could be worse. I smell a bit of oil burning off. The power steering luckily does not make any noise unless you really turn the steering wheel hard. I did get a warning light on. I don't know what it's for, but it's trying to tell me something. It's down there, it's orange. You can see it in the camera, and that's about all you can see. I hope the light that's on is just telling me that I have a brake light out, because I know that I have a brake light out. It's the right side tail light bulb, and I just haven't fixed it yet because I'm too busy doing 55 through a cornfield with no idea where I'm going. I am pleased to announce that the power mirrors in this car do in fact work, at least in the up and down direction, which is all I really need. Okay, we gotta be in overdrive now because we're doing 54 at about 1600 RPM. It feels like a Ford. It smells like a Ford. It's got that weird, like, Ford 80s plastic smell. I don't know how to describe it. If you know what I'm talking about. Like, if you've been in an 80s Ford, if you have one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't, I recommend you go sit in one because it's an interesting smell and I think everyone should experience it. The original plan had been to get a hotel the night after we bought the car and drive home the following morning, but the car felt fine and we were making good time, so we decided to keep going. There's nothing wrong. We're doing 55 down a country road in the middle of the night. I have very poor headlights. I have no idea what this car did before I bought it. I think it just sat for probably 3 or 5 years, and it shakes. And I have multiple known fluid leaks, at least 2 known fluid leaks. But I have new wipers, so that's good. Oh, the tires. The tires are really dry rotted. I have 2 spare tires on factory rims in the trunk. Those are both flat and probably even more dry rotted than the rubber that's on it, which was something I said I should probably change before I drove the car too far, and here I am driving it like 400, 350, yeah, it's 350 miles. Here I am driving it 350 miles back to Michigan. Nothing could possibly go wrong. Nothing at all. This is fine. There are 0 flaws with this plan. Quite literally, at midnight, a deer ran in front of me from the left side across to the right side of the road. Nothing I could do about it, so I just jammed on the brakes and wound up hitting it with the right front corner, knocked the deer off the road, which was lucky because if I'd hit it dead center, I think it would have come up through the windshield. It didn't look too bad at first. It kind of looked like I just knocked out a headlight and dented up the fender. I mean, it was the middle of the night, so I couldn't see very well. So we drove it down to the next exit just to get off the side of the road. When we pulled into that exit, the car started steaming. I went up front and realized that there was almost no coolant left, and the little bit that was left was being rapidly turned into steam. We couldn't get a hotel at that exit because there weren't any hotels at that exit. We pulled into like a really sketchy adult store because that was the only parking lot at the exit on the side we got off at. Looked at maps, realized there's a truck stop across the exit the other way, and we didn't want to leave the car at a sketchy parking lot. So drove it across the exit about as fast as I could and parked at the truck stop, all with no coolant. Luckily, they gave us permission to leave the car there overnight. We went back to the previous exit, got a hotel room for the night, and figured we'd just get a U-Haul in the morning and drag the car back to Michigan. Well, when we got up the next morning, we realized it was kind of hard to find a U-Haul, so we decided to try a long-distance tow truck. We put in an order for a tow truck, and after being shunted around through quite literally 4 different telephone operators, the tow truck finally showed up. We ordered the tow at 10 a.m. The truck didn't show up until 1 in the morning. We had to be there to load the car, and we didn't know when it was going to show up, because every telephone operator would give us a different time, and so we were stuck there. That said, getting a tow truck still wound up being cheaper than getting a U-Haul. Once the tow truck did arrive, we had to clarify to the driver that, the car has no coolant, so don't leave it running, and disconnect the battery when it's off, because I thought there was a drain on the battery when it was plugged in. Oh, and you couldn't open the passenger door because the fender had gotten pushed back into it in the crash, and I didn't want to bend the fender trying to pry the door open. The driver was great. He got the car in the trailer really quickly, and finally, at about 1:30 in the morning, the car was on its way back to Michigan again. And then, of course, we realized that we had to get back to Michigan before the tow driver did, because we wanted to be there when the car got unloaded. So instead of getting another hotel room and getting some sleep, we hit the road again in the middle of the night. We made it back home at 8 in the morning. So our 5-hour drive turned into a 36-hour drive, and it also wound up costing me some extra money for the tow and some money and time to fix the car. The next couple of videos will probably be about that, trying to patch up the car so that it functions well and hopefully doesn't look like a piece of garbage, or at least looks less like a piece of garbage.